What's up, everyone? We've discussed how to structure your project and how to create dynamic routes. So now it's time to start discussing the building blocks of a Next.js project. Organization is just the first step of an easy to navigate and edit project, but you need layouts and pages to actually start returning information on your development server. If you're relatively new to Next.js, the concepts of layouts and pages can seem complicated. So in this video, I plan to make these concepts simple. If you want the code that I use in this video, the link to the repo is in the description. Now, let's dive in. As I've mentioned in the past, Next.js uses a file system-based routing architecture. This means that you use folders and files to define the routes of your project. There are specific rules to how these files and folders work, and we're going to cover the Layout.tsx file, the Page.tsx file, and how to link between pages now. I'll start with the Layout.tsx file. In my video titled Getting Started with Next.js, I discussed that the Layout.tsx file wraps all the files within the same route as the Layout.tsx. This file is also shared between all the pages nested within it. Layouts preserve state and remain interactive. They don't re-render, so they are not suitable for things like authentication. You need to include at least one Layout.tsx file, and that's the one that exports your root layout. You can add as many Layout.tsx files as you want, though, just by adding it in a route. Let's look at an example. Let's go to our root layout file in our Layout.tsx right here. It's already open. This is the file that wraps your entire project. So you would want to use this file if you had global styles, tracking, or components you want to apply. Think things like HubSpot, Google Analytics, and your navigation component. Above the children in the body tag, let's add a paragraph tag that says simply, this is the root layout file, add global tracking here. We'll see how this renders with other components momentarily. In this next example project that I've created, we created a blog route, which adds localhost 3000/blog to our project. In this directory, I can also add a layout.tsx file by creating a new file called layout.tsx. And we can export a default function called layout, which will have an argument of children with the type of React node assigned to the children prop. Unlike the root layout, which must be named root layout, you can name these functions anything you'd like. Inside our function, we'll return a main element, which will have our children prop, and we'll include another paragraph tag that just says, this is the blog layout.tsx file. This can be used to handle custom logic at the route level. You can use layouts like this to apply granular tracking for just a specific route, or maybe a sidebar navigation that only applies to this segment. I can even include a layout.tsx file in our slug dynamic segment, again by including a layout.tsx, and we'll again export a default function called layout. And in this layout, we will pass in the children props, which will have the type of React node. And then we can return a React fragment, which will have a paragraph tag that says this is the blog category slug layout.tsx file. Use this for even more control. And then, of course, we can pass in our children prop as well. This is the most granular that we'll get, where we'll render a layout for the actual consumed page within a nested route. This may come in handy if you have page-specific navigation or tracking that you might want to include. When we load up our development server by running npm dev, we can go to our blog category of A, blog 1, and when we hit enter, we can see now our 3 different paragraph tags that we added in each of the layouts leading up to our category slug layout.tsx file. For more information about the hierarchy of how these files work together and when the layout.tsx file is rendered, check out my previous Next.js video on structuring your Next.js project. In addition to the children prop, layouts can take params as well. This allows you to get the route parameters based on the route in which the layout.tsx file is located. In order to do this, you'll need to make the layout function async. So we'll do that by adding the async keyword there. And then we need to add our params to our props. So we can add params there. And then within our types, we'll spread this out to make it a little easier to read. We'll include our params, which are going to take a promise, which will include a slug, as well as a category, which are both strings. Now we can destructure our params with the slug and the category constants being taken out, and we do need to await these params. And then to show this in action, we can include our category and our slug here in this paragraph tag. So I save this, and we can see now that this is the blog/a/blog1 layout.tsx file. Some things to consider is that you cannot access the request object in a layout. You can access headers and cookies through server functions though. As I mentioned before, layouts do not re-render, meaning that they can be cached to avoid expensive user computations when navigating between pages. Since layouts don't re-render, they also don't take search params, which are the parameters that come after a question mark in your URL bar. Instead, you should plan on using search params in your page or the use search params hook in a client component within the layout, which will prevent your search params from becoming stale. Lastly, layouts cannot access your path name. Path name is only accessible through client components, and since layouts are server components by default and by design, the path name would become stale between navigations, making it useless. Instead, you'll want to use a client component and the use path name hook to access the current path name and prevent the path from becoming stale. Let's talk about pages and linking next, but before we do though, check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you never miss when I release more content about Next.js, payloadcms, and other modern web dev technology. Tired of trying to keep up with all the news and updates across the technologies and companies you use? Sign up for my newsletter to get a bi-weekly overview of all the web dev news from across the internet. The link to that is in the description. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to it. A page is the actual UI that is rendered in a specific segment. Without a Page.tsx file, there is no user interface. And yes, Page.tsx is the required name for that file. We've already created a few Page.tsx files, so we've seen these in action. When visiting the routes, it's not necessary to add /page.tsx in the path. You access this page simply by going to the route the Page.tsx file is in. For example, our home page is at the /route. So if I just type in the /, we get our home page. Our blog page is at /blog, which will be a 404 because we don't have any content here. And then lastly, as we've already seen, our individual blog post is at our blog category slug route. Pages are server components by default, but unlike layouts, these can be set to be a client component using the use client directive. That means pages can be dynamically rendered with fresh data. We'll go over one caveat with client component pages in a moment. Pages can take params and search params as props. Both of these are available whether the page is a server or client component. These params both return promises that resolve to an object containing different aspects of the URL bar. Params returns an object with a single key value pair, multiple key value pairs, or an object with an array of values depending on the dynamic route parameters provided. For example, if your dynamic route is simply slug, a single key value pair of that slug will be returned. If your dynamic route is nested with different names, you will receive an object with key value pairs for each dynamic folder's name and the value it returns. If you're using a catch-all route, you will receive an object with a key that contains an array of values based on what the URL bar says. Search params work much the same way. However, since search params is a dynamic API and the values can't be known ahead of time, the page in which search params is used will be opted into dynamic rendering at the time of request, which means you cannot use generate static params for these pages. Search params are defined in the URL bar by including a question mark and then a set of key value pairs separated by ampersands. If you only include one search param, you will receive an object with a single key value pair in return. If you include search params that each have different keys, you will receive a key value pair for each different key you include. If you have multiple values for any given key, an array of values will be provided for that key. One last thing to note about search params. This is a plain JavaScript object and should not be confused with the URL search params instance. Since search params also returns a promise for client components, we need a different way to handle these promises, since client components can't be async. Fortunately, we can simply use the React use hook to get the values of these params. I'll show you what I mean. So we'll go to our individual blog page, which we'll see over here in our Page.tsx. And we do need to clean this file up a little bit to make it a client component, so we can get rid of all of that. Add use client. And then we're going to import use from React. We'll remove the async keyword from this function. We will include both params and our search params. And in our params type here, we need to include our search params as well, which will take a promise of key with a string or a string array or a regular string or just undefined. And then we can no longer use await here. So we're going to use our params. And then we're also going to get, just for an example, a query from our search params by using the use hook there. We'll keep our slug and our category, but we're going to add a paragraph tag that just says this is the query, and then pass in the query there. So now if I save this, we won't see much change. But now if we add a query that just says this is a query, we can see that this is a query pops up here, and it's just being taken from this question mark onward. Now, as you may know, we can't use generate static params in a client component, so I did have to remove that as well. Now, let's talk about how to link between routes using the Next.js link component. The link component is a built-in Next.js component that extends the HTML anchor tag. This component provides prefetching and client-side navigation out of the box. This allows for a smooth user experience when navigating through your website. If you're linking to an external site, you should still use a regular HTML anchor tag, but it doesn't hurt if you use a link component for those as well. The link component takes all the same attributes as a normal anchor tag. Let's build out an example. First things first, let's go ahead and import our link component from next link, and then we can use our link here. And we'll just include our link text of home. Now we get this little red line because href is required, and this is the only required prop for the link component. So I'm going to include our home route and clear our errors. But since we can use all the attributes that we would normally use in an anchor tag, that means we can include a class name. And so I can include this class name of button, which will be rendered on the front end. It means we can also use target. So if we want to open it in the same window, or if we want to open it in a different window, we can do that using blank. However, other props do exist in the link component. First is something like replace, which defaults to false. When you set replace to true, this will replace the history state of a user's browser's history stack instead of adding it to the stack. This prevents people from using the back button in their browser after clicking on a link. Scroll defaults to true, which tells the Next.js link component to maintain its scroll position when navigating from route to route. This is similar to how browsers handle back and forward navigations. As long as the page is visible in the viewport, the scroll position will stay the same. If you don't want this behavior, you can set scroll to false, which will tell Next.js to not attempt to scroll to the first page element. Prefetch is only enabled in our production environment. Otherwise, it is null by default. What that means, though, is that you won't see the behavior of the prefetch prop in development. When set to null, which is the default option like I mentioned, the prefetch prop tells Next.js to load linked routes and its data in the background to improve the performance of client-side navigation. If the fetched data has expired because of revalidation rules or other reasons, then Next.js will prefetch it again when the user hovers over the link component. By default, the prefetch prop will tell Next.js to prefetch the full route and all of its data if a route is static. If the route is dynamic, all the data down to the first segment with a loading boundary will be prefetched. If prefetch is set to true, the full route and all of its data will be fetched for both static and dynamic routes. If false, prefetching will be disabled completely. Lastly, we have onNavigate. OnNavigate is an event handler that is called during client-side navigation. You can pass in an anonymous function that takes the argument E for event, and you can pass in custom logic, like we'll just do an alert that says navigated. Now, I'm going to change our target to self, so we can see this onNavigate in action. Now, you don't need to use an alert for this onNavigate prop. You can do things like a console log or a toast when a user navigates. OnNavigate won't trigger if you do decide to use the link component for external URLs, use modifier keys like Control or Command to open it in a new tab, for example, or have download set as an attribute on your links. So we can see all of this in action by saving it, and if I click on the link, we'll see an alert pop up that just says navigated, and then we'll be brought to the home page. While link is the recommended way to navigate between your route, you do also have the use router hook available to you if you want more advanced navigation. More on that in a later video. Layouts, pages, and linking between pages form the building blocks of any Next.js project. Understanding how these work and how they work together is a sure way to build a well thought out project that is easy to navigate. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content around Next.js, payloadcms, Tailwind CSS, and more. Also, consider subscribing to my newsletter to stay up to date with modern web dev news from across multiple platforms. There's a link to that in the description. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.